Okay, I guess we can start, not to lose our precious time during lunch. So hi everyone, one more time. Thanks for joining. My name is Nastassia Shahun, and I'm a senior business analyst. And today I would like to just talk you through, share my experience and my learnings from event storming. And I see it as a practical BA technique for creating shared understanding. And I hope that you find this session helpful. Of course, we'll have some time left at the end to answer your questions, or if you would like to share your experience, you're very much welcome. So now let me just start, and not to forget all the important things I wanted to share with you today. So, and I also must say that this is not going to be a deep theory session, and it's not about becoming a domain-driven design expert. My goal here is much simpler: to show you a workshop technique that helps people understand how a process or a specific, particular system actually works together in the same room or on the same board. And as business analysts, I hope most of you relate to business analysis or product development. We often work in situations where different people understand the same process, the same domain, the same question in different ways. And they also sometimes talk different languages. And event storming gives us a fast visual way to bring those various perspectives together. So today I would like to show you what it is, when to use it, how it works in practice, and how BAs can facilitate it effectively so that all team members and all various departments who joined benefit from it. So let's start with the problem it helps us solve. Um, as you know, many projects often struggle not because nobody wrote requirements, but because people do not share the same understanding of the process. And business sees one version of the main of the part of the application. Technical teams see another version. Operations has their own reality, and testing finds things that nobody even talked about. And I see that the gap here is between those views, because these different parts and different perspectives just stay hidden for too long. That is why issues often appear late during delivery, UAT phase, or implementation, and when changes are much harder and more expensive to solve and to revert. So the real challenge is not about missing requirements. It is the gap between what the business means, what the team builds, and what the system actually needs to support so that end users receive some value, some benefit from using the system or the platform. That is the gap that event storming helps us close. So if for someone who is not familiar what event storming is, let me just share what it is. Event storming is a collaborative workshop technique used to map out complex business processes by brainstorming the main events on a shared board, usually with sticky notes. Of course, today it's very hard to gather all the team because we are most of the cases we are a distributed team, so it's hard to get everyone in the same room. It would be ideal, of course, but of course you can use any online tools like Miro, Mural, or Lucid Chart to gather together and collect all the ideas. So the idea is to bring the main experts, developers together to visualize workflows, identify key bottlenecks, and align on a shared understanding, usually in a rapid, chaotic to structured process. The technique was created in 2012 by Alberto Branolini. I hope I pronounced the surname correctly, who believes that problems cannot be solved with the same mindset that originated them. That's why it's a useful moment when various perspectives, business and technical mainly, can gather together and discuss I would say the foundation things of how the domain works. And so that a domain event is simply something that happened in the domain that a domain expert would care about. So you would invite subject matter experts on accounting, for example, right? Who knows how similar systems should behave and how they should, how end users would interact with the system, and you would, ask what's the flow and so on. So, basically these are the events and the main experts. And having the main events, as the key entity here is one of the reasons the technique works so well. It keeps the conversation grounded in what actually happens rather than just jumping too early into some theoretical ideas, some potential edge cases, maybe solutions or system design. It usually starts in a rapid, even chaotic way, and then becomes more structured over time. And that is normal. And this is exactly the point, because in that messy to structured movement, it just this helps us bring the value, because to our main goal is to get knowledge out of people's heads and make sure that everyone sees the same process, with the same eyes, I would say. I also like to say that this technique is very useful because it brings business experts and technical teams to break down the silos and create a shared understanding of the domain, of the business domain. So this is the key thing. We are not discussing some, technical architectural decisions or some, technical stuff which business stakeholders don't understand. We are here just to get the same understanding of the business, because personally, I worked on a few projects where even business users, they talked different language. However, they still were from the same domain, from the same company. And it was very important to get them on the call together to share, a screen and just let them play with event cards. I will later show how this playground looks like. And of course, like any technique, this is not useful, in every situation you might encounter on projects. So as I mentioned, you do not need event storming for every conversation, for every case you have. It is most useful when the process is complex, when you have a lot of stakeholders involved from multiple departments, maybe conflicting ones, when scope isn't clear, or when people keep talking past each other. Here is like a short list of all the cases where it is useful to, in my opinion, to use event storming. So, for example, it is good fit before starting a new project, before implementing a new feature that would impact the existing functionality a lot, before beginning a new user story, which also has some key, dependencies on other, parts of the application of the system you are working on, or when trying to improve or rethink an existing process. For example, you are trying to find an alternative to an existing process that doesn't work, for example. It can also be useful after something has already been delivered, and when you're trying to understand why the process is not working well in reality. So you might just map the ideal process and mention all of the things there. So my rule of thumb is this: if you have confusion, if you anticipate some hidden assumptions, or too many different views of how something works, and you have them, you don't have a single source of truth of and the single understanding of the process, of the key process. So event storming is worth considering and having in your toolkit. At the same time, here you can see just a few items mentioned for the cases where it's not so beneficial to use event storming. So for example, if your process is too simple or linear, or if you have already been given a good, extensive set of documentation about the project, about the processes, or the business has already agreed on some terms, on some steps in the flow, and has shared this documentation with you. So um, it's not beneficial just to create or practice this technique for the sake of having it, or applying it. So maybe you'll have to wait for a better situation in the project where it would be most useful. Or for example, if the problem is just relates to your own internal team, where you can just gather, on a meeting or just have a chat and agree on some terms and processes. Now let's see, when we know what the event storming is, we know when it's useful to use or not. And, now it's important, and I would say crucial, to understand the grammar, the language of this technique. So the heart of event storming is the domain event. That is the most important node on the board. You can see it's always of orange color, and it should be written in the past tense. That's the key thing here. Something that has already happened. For example, order placed, payment failed, account approved. You can see the formula, right? So it's a noun plus the verb in the past tense. Then we would add other pieces of context around those events. For example, commands are the actions that trigger events. These are requests from a user or another event. On a yellow card, we will have actors who are the users or roles involved in the process. And to remind your team of the human element represented by the sticky note, you might wish to draw a stick figure here. The user can be one person or several people who trigger an event, or maybe the entire department. On the pin card, we usually map external systems that, some maybe external tools, platforms that participate in our process. And these usually represent systems that issue or receive some commands within the domain that we are looking at. As for policies, these are the business rules or conditions that may have to be executed, such as for compliance or authorization, or if you have any, specific rules directly related to your domain. For example, in e-commerce, that you might say that, in this country you have just one currency available or something like that. And as the last point here, but I would say one of the most important ones is about hotspots that mark pain points, unknowns, some bottlenecks, some key critical questions that must be answered before any development can even be planned. And the good news is that you don't need to use every type of node in every session. In practice, I usually start with just simple layout and just start with events. Of course, it's the key thing here, but I don't always have policies, for example, because the process I'm looking at can be too simple, or there are no specific policies in place for us to follow in this process. So, and you need just to only add more detail when it helps the conversation and when you have some, maybe you're looking at very complex projects, at very complex processes. So it's it would be beneficial for you to also note various type of policies or external systems involved. But if the process is simple, there is no need to invent a wheel. Just use some basic elements just to keep the conversation going. And that brings us to an important BA skill, adapting the technique to the people in the room. And one of the strengths I can see in using event storming technique is that it's very flexible. So if I'm working with a business audience, I keep the conversation high level just to get to focus on alignment, on value, on some pain points, and understanding the big picture. And with this audience, it's usually easy to get, the boundaries of the domain that we're looking at, specific at the specific part. So as you can see, I use events, actors, and hotspots because business people are mostly interested in some areas that are not perfect today, and this helps them prioritize, if area needs their attention, maybe needs budget, needs more team capacity to be involved in the future development work. So yeah, that's why having, this flexibility in using event storming is important. Moving to the next audience, which is the tech audience, I can say that if I work with a technical audience, tech experts, I can go deeper into systems, policies, aggregates, or bounded context. So because these people usually are like solution architects or lead developers, and they are mostly interested in understanding, of course, getting the idea of the business process, but they're interested how the business processes, business steps we identify would be related to the functionality, to the systems they have or they should have, because they can plan the architecture, plan the work more deeply. But I also must highlight that during event storming sessions, we are not focusing, we are not discussing out loud the technical stuff. But this just helps when we get a bit one layer deeper into the systems and maybe focus more on policies, on some external platforms tools involved. This helps technical teams see their area responsibility and plan their capacity for the project. And if the room is mixed, which is often the most interesting setup, my role as a BA becomes even more important because I start being the translation layer. Business helps clarify the what, and the tech helps clarify the how. So as you can see, the technique itself stays the same, but the grammar I use, the depths I go into, the questions I ask during those facilitation sessions, and the way I facilitate the discussion all depend on who is in the room. So now let's walk through how an event storming session actually unfolds, following the four steps. So the first step is what I call chaotic exploration. People write down the main events on sticky notes, post them on the board quickly without worrying about order first. This is very intentional here. At this point, we want speed, not perfection. The goal is to get this knowledge out of people's heads and see if all people in the team, I mean, like the broader team from various departments, understand how, the overall, the process end-to-end works. If they don't get it, so this is like the exact value that event storming brings us. And if you look at the example on the cards, you can see the notes like item added to cart, checkout started, shipping calculated, payment failed, and others. So right now, those events are not neatly organized, and that is fine. The point is to get knowledge out of people's heads, as I mentioned, and onto the board so that it's explicitly visualized, and people now can just refer to this board to ask their questions and to continue various discussions in different directions if they have any, specific questions depending on the step. From a facilitation point of view, this is where I encourage people to keep moving and not focus on reading other people's notes because some people also worry about duplicates. All these questions will be resolved further in the process. I remind them usually to write events in the past tense, keep the words in simple, and avoid debating too early about specific steps that they want to include on the board. And this step works because it uses group learning. Different people bring different pieces of the main knowledge, various perspectives, and we make it all these things visible very quickly, and they would be, much less space for confusion or for understanding something differently. Once the wall has enough events, we can start adding more structure to it. So the next step is to enforce a timeline. We take all those events that were added in the previous step and arrange them from left to right chronologically. This way, we are removing duplicates and we are starting, discussing the sequence in a group. This is where hidden assumptions really begin to surface. As you can see in the example on the slide, the cards are now lined up more clearly, and people usually would ask, does shipping get calculated before payment? Can an order be confirmed if payment fails? Are we missing inventory validation somewhere? What looks like a simple process often turns out to be understood, I would say, very differently by different people. And that's exactly why this step matters, because the timeline exposes disagreement in a visible and practical way. I often saw cases when people, they just cared about their own kind of area of responsibility or like part of the system, part of the tool, and they were not aware how the outputs that they produced were used as inputs to other processes and sub parts of the systems. And once I got a question, so why should we keep the deadline, for example, 10th of each month? We can do it by 15th, right? But the problem was that uh, by 10th of the month was the deadline to start another process, and they were not aware of this of the importance how the uh, you know, um, keeping the deadlines, producing the outputs in the appropriate format agreed upon based on the templates, how it was important for the overall, business success. And during those sessions where we can meet, because I believe it's one of the rare cases where business and technical worlds rarely meet, and have a fruitful discussion. And this is exactly the moment where we can ask and, try to understand each other, try to understand technical concerns, and also at the same time understand the business world, how it operates and how it's structured. So as a BA, I do not try to solve everything immediately if we have some, hot debates here. My job is to help the team notice where the gaps are, where the most frustration comes from. If some people are not, aware of something, just let them digest all this information, understand the bird view picture, and proceed with the next steps. Because once the sequence is clearer, we can start adding more context around the events. Now we ask who triggered this event and what action caused it. So this is where we add actors and commands. In the example, we can connect a yellow note like customer. You remember this is our actor, with a blue command node like click pay. That helps explain how we moved from one event to the next. So as you can see on the slide, checkout started. This is just the result of some actions that someone performed some action in the system. So the business just cares about, the result, this orange cards, but how to read it, how to understand how this event happens, right? We understand that the customer clicks the pay button on the UI, and then the checkout started. So this is like the way how to read it, how to read the, I wouldn't say the notation, but the part of the flow that you can see on the screen. The step is very useful because it also helps us connect business behavior to a system behavior. We stop looking at events as isolated facts and start seeing the actions and roles behind them. For BAs, this is often where the conversation becomes more useful because um, we can use this information later in discovery if we are involved, or in requirements work. We start to understand not just what happened, but what drives the flow and what triggers specific step, what actions need to be done so that this orange card and event appears on our flow. Still, I try to keep the focus on process understanding and do not let the room jump too fast to technical design and creating some architecture, talking about various data inputs, data formats. So these, we have a lot of various artifacts, diagram types to provide this technical, description of the process, of the things that are needed to build it. So here we are just focusing on the business side and getting everyone agree to the build flow. Once the main flow is visible to everyone, we can add the things like, that usually make real life more complicated. And this is the stage where we enrich the model with rules, system, some friction points. In event storming language, this means we are bringing policies, external systems, and platforms, and also hotspots. If you look at the example, maybe we add a rule like you can see on the slide, free shipping is available if the card is above $50. Maybe we show the payment gateway as an external system, and then we mark a hotstop like Stripe API is very slow today, right? Or payment status unclear. This is where the model becomes more realistic because people are very, what I noticed, that they are very eager to share, their the moments that they get annoyed at, or they don't like, or they heard that, end clients were complaining about, and it's very easy to add complaints, right? And pain points that, for example, one department deals with or has some had to come up with some workaround. So, and when we just reflected, the orange cards, it was quite easy because we just visualized the happy path. And when we add these rules around events and the pain points, this starts reflecting the actual complexity of the domain of the real one. And in my experience, this is also where the biggest insights show up. The real issue is often not the main process step, it's the dependency, exception, or policy around it. So the step serves two purposes. I can say that method-wide, it shows how we continue the model, but practically it shows how risks, assumptions, I would say critical questions that impact the development become visible. And once that context is on the board, we can talk about what value the workshop actually delivers. Because you might be wondering, okay, we just created one more flow diagram, right? And what's next? And what's the value? How I can, talk my team into having something like that. So at this point, the board starts giving us real value because we can see missing steps, we can see conflicting assumptions from various departments or teams. We can have a clear view on unclear ownership, unanswered questions, or process bottlenecks. But at the same time, for business, it's a great way to spot opportunities to simplify the flow. Because once we have, imagine having this the whole flow with, and one part of it is just full of red cards. It seems, and it means that we are. Lacking something in the process, and most complaints are also focused in this area. So this is might be a good, way to prioritize your features, your development work for upcoming quarters as well. If you work on the business side. So, and beyond that, the workshop creates a shared language across roles. That matters a lot because it is rare that all team members have the same understanding of the domain. I have never, uh, during my career, I have never met, entire team. I mean, like generally business and technical teams have just the same understanding from the start. Mm-mm. We always had various, numerous meetings, uh, various huge artifacts like requirements documents and some explanations about what the process is. But, until the moment I discovered event storming, I couldn't make everyone be on the same page, literally just looking at the flow that we built and understand it without even having to have special knowledge on some business analysis techniques or, some training, some special training. Nothing like that was required. And it also useful to support in supporting onboarding discovery for newcomers because they can just glance at the entire flow and then quickly grasp the idea, find themselves where they are in the process in general, and maybe what teams they should collaborate more. And solution design, it also supports the solution design because the domain is now visible and discussable. So for me, the biggest value is this. Event storming makes invisible complexity visible. And once that happens, better conversations and better decisions are possible, and better decisions are made much easier. It also beneficial for both business and technical people. So when saying this, so it brings us directly to the BA role in all this process. You can see the hero. I try to picture us as heroes because here with this, when we try to implement and deploy this technique in real life, our role is much more than documented in the workshop. As you can see before the session, we are involved in defining the scope, identifying specific process we want to explore, inviting the right people, maybe first identifying and then inviting the right people, and preparing the board and the notation. When I say the board, maybe it's in-person event if someone is lucky and has this luxury of having everyone meeting in person, or just setting up the digital dashboard and presenting the notation, the color-coded cards, and explaining what they mean. During the session, we ask the right questions, we keep the conversation moving, we stop the room from going off track or, going deep into discussions which are not part of the session's agenda. And we also surface assumptions and conflicts without shutting people down. We're just making, some notes, maybe even on the board, that this is a conflict and for further discussions might be needed, sorry, in the future to resolve the conflicts. And after the session, we help turn the outcomes into something useful. This can be discovery inputs, requirements conversations, and maybe backlog discussions, process improvements, or follow-up decisions with next steps. It also depends whether we are involved in at what stage we are using event storming, and if we're involved in further process, and development work or not, or we're just invited to have the discovery covered. So you can see the BA is really helping the group think clearly before, during, and after the workshop. That is why I see event storming as a strong BA technique, not just a general workshop format, which is just useful to have in your toolkit, and just to have somewhere in your head to know that this exists. And when you have a chance, you can apply it without even going through some formal trainings. It's just easy to visually understand and grasp the quick idea of what needs to be done. Of course, like any workshop, it can go wrong if you're not careful or not prepared well, because as any workshop, it's your responsibility to prepare, to understand that a lot of people might be present. They might have various questions or some off-track topics, and you need to be able to cope with those, maybe park them for future conversations, or to just politely say that we are here, and trying to stick everyone to sessions agenda and sessions topic. There are a few common pitfalls that I've noticed. That one is starting with solutions too early. People want to jump into design, into some UI changes before they have agreed on what actually happens in the overall process. Second is they are trying to model everything. That's also, if they're not ever modeling, just modeling some part of the process, or just modeling the entire like ecosystem, and the session becomes too big, too abstract, and too tiring for everyone, that at the end of the session, people just might not be interested in contributing and just saying, okay, I will go and eat my lunch, right? And not spending like hours discussing the entire system. Another is focusing on technical implementation too soon. If that happens, you lose business people, and the conversations, all the conversations start being stop being useful, because technical jargon is not something that is understandable to business people all the time. And then there are a few practical pitfalls, like missing key people, letting one voice dominate, or forgetting to capture the output once the session ends. I think that that's like uh, one of the key rules of business analysis, to capture outputs of any session, any experiment, any training that you had with business people or with technical people, doesn't matter. Um, because if you don't capture, like for example, I also once had the meeting which was on Friday. It was you know late hours my Friday, and I thought, oh, all right, I will remember everything because it was late Friday. But my weekend was so intense that on Monday morning I didn't remember anything. So that was hard because I didn't have any recording. I just had some rough notes, and I had to really ask people one more time, just offline, some of the key questions I wanted to clarify. And it was, a mistake that we shouldn't do. And even like, especially it's a good advice for people who have in-person events, or like in-person sessions. If you don't take a picture of the wall that's with all of the sticky notes, it will be hardly possible to recreate and gather these people one more time and recreate the process. So it's just better to take a few pictures, to take notes. If you are using any online tool, it's, nowadays it's auto saved. So you must be, you might be covered here, but just make sure that the results are captured somewhere, or you can just write some summary and share the same link, the photos with everyone involved so that people can see the results of their work. Um, and my advice would be simple: to keep it focused, time box the phases, each of the phases that we discussed, facilitate rather than command, and capture the results immediately. One of the main things. Let me now summarize what I hope you take away from this session. If you remember just a few things from today, that's also fine. I would make you remember this. So, event storming is a practical way to create shared understanding quickly among various uh, parts of our team, of our big team. I say big team when I mean like people involved, not just development work or not just business departments, even various departments, but all the people working on the same domain or the same application or big parts of the application. It also helps us surface hidden assumptions and risks early. So and with creating this common language across business and technical roles, it's easy to have good collaboration later on, because now people work through the same visible model, which is available to everyone, and it's kind of a single source of truth for all people involved in the project. And also, it gives ABA a concrete way to support discovery, maybe requirements thinking, and better decision making. If, for example, we are combining roles of a product owner and we need also to help with prioritization. So it's a great way to get the idea of what matters most today for the project and for the product. So again, you don't need to make it perfect from the start or use all elements, all grammar elements that you've learned today. Just start simple, focus on what happened, and let the conversation do the work. Because you know that the people, when they have something in common, have shared values and views, now they can just continue the conversation, and everyone can have the same point from the start. So because you have the same knowledge, and you can continue the various conversations if you need deeper, you know um, to understand deeper some parts of the flow. And before I open for questions, one practical reminder: you don't need a huge, polished workshop to get value from event storming. You can just have one simple process with clear problem, and then just write a small group of people that might be interested and has a domain knowledge in this area. And even a lightweight session can reveal things like 2 weeks that 2 weeks of development or meetings do not surface, based on my experience. So thanks for being here today, and I'd love to hear your questions if you have any, and if you want to share your experiences, it would be much appreciated. Thanks.
Right. So thank you very much. You already got a great presentation comment in the chat.
Oh, thanks.
So anybody have any questions for Nastasia? So you can come off mute, ask her yourself with your voice, or you can put it in the chat and I can relay it to her.
If you have a question after the session, so feel free to message me on LinkedIn, and we can connect and continue the discussion.
Yeah, I did put her LinkedIn
Oh, thanks.
profile in the chat, as she started and everything. So just let you know. If you didn't know, Nastasia is in Poland.
Oh, yeah, yeah. It's end of my day, so
End of your day,
yeah,
okay?
yeah,
Yeah,
it's
I've seen
almost 6.
comments. We got the UK here, um, and Canada was, they were saying where they were from as you
Hmm.
started and everything, um, telling us where they were joining us from. So many here in the States, um, but we did have some um, from even outside North America besides you.
Hmm. Great. And by the way, if you need a copy of the presentations of the slides, I can also share. Um, yep, no problem.
Okay, yeah, you send those to me. All attendees will get an email tomorrow, a follow-up that will have the slides that Nastasia will share with me, and I will put them in that email. It'll have a link to this recording and your CDU information. So Stephen can't wait to try this new technique. So
And let
yeah,
us know the results, if it
I
worked or
think
not.
you've piqued a few interest out here.
Yeah. Oh, and by the way, I can also share, I should include some additional materials which could also be useful for you to, if you have some time to deep dive into the technique or you need more resources. So I can also share. I need to include the last slide with the resources, I guess.
Okay. Yeah, you put it as the last slide on your presentation, then they will all get that.
Mhm.
Okay. Anybody before we break here? Well, it's almost time to go back to work, so
Yeah. So have a great day, everyone, and thanks for joining. I wish you a pleasant day and not maybe a working day. Bye bye.
all right. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Hope you got a lot out of this. Go out and try this new technique if you've not done it before. I can tell you I haven't, and am looking forward to it. So I've just heard about event storming and was very interested in learning what it was all about. So it was great to hear this. And I'm with Stephen, love try and go out and try something new.
Yeah.
So thank you for joining us. Have a great rest of your day or evening, wherever you may be joining us from.
Thanks. Bye bye.